days are tough nowadays. I feel like I start every video with that. But I've never truly realized how difficult it is to be a woman. So let's sympathize with them at the start of this video first. Between getting unwanted attention, which I never even thought was a thing, to get unwanted harassment as a result, which is of course quite bad. Also having to put up a creeper shield, so not be called you can be called a B word for it, but you have to protect yourself not only physically from the ever-present physical threat that men might pose, but also to protect yourself from the idea that you are giving off hints, giving off mixed signals, and therefore when stuff is starting to go down, that you are asking for it. But mostly if you as a person get measured by a standard of beauty in our society right now, but we think women are mostly important because of their beauty and the way we commodify it, that standard of beauty not only doesn't really exist, it's a standard that you can never reach. It is a standard that will make you feel permanently inadequate and fill you with insecurities. I cannot even try to relate with it. I'm sorry. Not even taking away from that at all, men have their own problems too that we now tend to overlook because our society tends to favor men, as we say. Like I said in another video, when we have gender roles that coexist and cannot exist without one another, that what it means to be a woman is essentially intertwined with what it means to be a man. But it also means that the problems that women face with those gender roles have a flip side in men that might screw them over too. Maybe less, maybe more, depends on the issue. Therefore, it's not very valuable to think about men's issues and women's issues in isolation and just tell the other side to fix the things that you disagree with them on, and then you will have a great society. The problem in this sense is that women and men exist in a hierarchy. That in our society right now, we reward masculinity, and therefore masculinity usually is a dominant power force as an ideal. But that's because they are hierarchical. If you were to have women's issues only be addressed and not consider the men's issues in the process, then you'll just get another person on top or another kind of group on top that will create the same kind of inequalities that we're not fond of. I hope as a disclaimer that it's clear that when I talk about men and women, I talk about the dominant gender roles in our society. I do, of course, also acknowledge that there are lots of great non-binary and queer people that these things could apply to. So if they do, please let me know. I think it's just easier to sketch an image that most people are familiar with. When we talk about unwanted attention and unwanted harassment that women face, it's a big problem. That problem also has a flip side in men. Not because men are conditioned to be the pursuer in a relationship, a heteronormative relationship, that means that men open their hearts up to be rejected when they approach someone. And beforehand, there is no way to know whether your approach is going to be unwanted. Well, there are cues like body language or whether it's a restraining order against you. Those are very good clues, but you might never know. And it would also not be a good rule of thumb to just assume that your approach is going to be unwanted, because that will only give you more insecurity. There are lots of people that are very willing to talk to you, even though you might not think it. People wearing headphones is a very good example, that people might just like listening to music on their day-to-day. It might also be a sign that they do not want to be disturbed, but you can never really know. You cannot look inside the mind of another. If you then make the rule of thumb that people should just stick to not approaching other people because it's just not appropriate, then you get a society that is just less warm and has less practice actually interacting with one another in good ways, which makes men more resentful and has women also be more lonely. It's just not good all around. Besides obviously creepy behavior, you can never really know whether your approach is going to be considered charming or creepy. That's usually a matter of attractiveness, but we don't really judge ourselves fairly about how attractive we actually are, especially when you want to approach someone that you actually like. I've also talked about the creeper shield. It's a shame that it's necessary that women have to put up a creeper shield in order to not only protect themselves physically, but protect themselves from the idea that they're giving off hints, and therefore have to show no emotion, not approach people because you might be giving off mixed signals. It's not bad that they're doing it, it's sad to see that it's necessary in the world we live. In the same way, in the society that we live in now, it's also a shame that most interaction of men, especially men that get to an adolescent and then adult age, the most interaction that men have with women, especially intimate connection, is with their romantic partner. So people are obsessed and feel like they need to have a partner in order to become whole. It's not bad that to have connections, like I always talk about, but when you think your value is based on your ability to have a romantic relationship, not only is the romantic relationship just a connection that you could enjoy and be beautiful, it becomes a necessary source of not only therapy, but also of self-worth. In a world then where all meaningful interactions between men and women are confined to a romantic relationship, it becomes not only very important to be in a romantic relationship, not getting it turns into desperation, which turns into insistence, which turns into rejection usually, and that turns into resentment. The world we live in now isn't very good at teaching men and women the social skills they need to connect in a meaningful way with one another. And therefore, for their own protection, both men and women have their reasons to become isolated within their groups, never really connecting, becoming resentful, and having to protect themselves by putting up a creeper shield, for example. On the one hand, for women, beauty is the inescapable factor that determines their value in society. It's a cruel tormentor for any woman that, but not only women, there is an incessant need to change yourself in order to be loved and accepted by the other sex or by the people around you in general. And as you might imagine, on the other hand, you have men, which are valued based on their masculinity, what it means to be a man. So both factors, what femininity means, like mostly beauty, and for what masculinity means is success, riches, being able to be a breadwinner, being strong, tall, muscled, funny, personality-wise, all of these things, they all determine just how valuable you are as a person in a sort of abstract societal way. It is fully determinative of how attractive you are considered to be. And attractiveness itself is an essential factor for life. It is the oil within the engine of life. It makes everything easier. It is a social lubricant. It is a transactional lubricant. It is an actual lubricant if you are attractive enough to attract many people and want to have coitus with them. But of course, on the flip side, not only it is the oil that gives all these nice benefits, there is a constant need to keep up appearances, to continue being attractive, which can be a big curse. I wouldn't know anything about it, but I've heard people talk about it. In short, as we've talked about, the world doesn't make it easy to be anyone. Going back into history for women, with the onset of the different waves of feminism, there's plenty of systemic critiques of how women are oppressed in society. Critiques I wholly agree with mostly, and there's plenty of actual searching of what it means to be a woman and what freedom actually looks like. With those different waves of feminism and in pop culture, there's a term that has taken on a life of its own that doesn't mean anything about what it was intended to mean. When we talk about toxic masculinity, it is a political term that nobody seems to understand, and therefore, although there's lots of talk about what toxic masculinity is, sometimes very legitimate parts of what toxic masculinity is, but there's very little talk about then what makes healthy masculinity. If you only criticize toxic masculinity and not actually talk about what healthy masculinity means, then you leave an entire group of people without aspiration of what should be. And then toxic masculinity becomes a stand-in for masculinity that becomes a punching bag. If you have masculinity itself be a punching bag, then people will try to resist and not actually help you with your political project. Toxic masculinity then is something that doesn't encapsulate the entirety of masculinity. Toxic masculinity means that some parts of how we envision masculinity are not only toxic for women, they are toxic for men themselves. Think about the idea that it is not okay to cry for men. It results in men that are emotionally stunted, more unattractive, and it's not good in the world that we live in nowadays. But also think of the idea that men are supposed to be the breadwinners. Not even very controversial. If you think about the economy that we live in nowadays, it's very difficult to be a sole breadwinner at all, because that's not possible with the wages that are paid to people and minimum wage not being enough to make ends meet. Also, being the sole breadwinner is something that might have been able to happen after the Second World War, but clearly the current economy doesn't allow for people to be the sole breadwinner and the other person staying home, because you just will not make ends meet. And this video therefore is about what healthy masculinity should look like. And it's a bit of a controversial title, that how we should fix men, but we should provide an image of masculinity that is healthy, not just by having good role models that might become problematic and cancel worthy after a few years, but by really envisioning what healthy masculinity might be like that isn't toxic towards women and men themselves. There is a void to be filled up, a void of purpose that I intend to at least contribute to today. In other words, what would it mean to be a good man in the world that we live in now? We all think that we need to be the most attractive and the most masculine in order to connect with people at all. Other people will not take us seriously otherwise. And on those insecurities, our capitalist system will prey upon you by selling you stuff. It's kind of like a Disney villain. The system will put you up against yourself and other people when it's not necessary. As such, in a society where our insecurities are sold back to us in the way of beauty products or gym memberships, even though it's good to go to the gym, you got a society that commodifies our insecurities. And it leads to a crisis of masculinity and a void that needs to be filled up. This void has been filled up sometimes by charlatans like Andrew Tate, or alleged sex traffickers like Andrew Tate, but also pickup artists and men's rights activists or Jordan Peterson like characters. Charlatans that try to sell you the snake oil of these good old trusty patriarchy back to you, justifying your most insecure tendencies of saying, well, I'm not wrong, I'm not in the wrong, the society is in the wrong, and society should be made to serve me. And with their vision of masculinity, they sell the patriarchy back to you and give you the formula of what you need in order to become a true man. You can see it all the time. You can see it with being successful. You can see it with being stoic and strong and having lots of money and having women swoon over you and being tall and muscled and handsome. All of these things, the tried and true formula. And with such a big gaping hole of a void inside you that needs to be filled up with this formula, you can again sense the appeal of people like Andrew Tate, because they are evidently doing quite well. Well, not right now, but they were when he was at his height. And I want you to note something. It's not just that Andrew Tate is successful because he is what a man should be. It is both ways. Not only does Tate become successful because he channels these insecurities into a formula of being successful, his way of being successful becomes then what it means to be a man. So we need to fix this cycle. They are mutually constitutive, and you need to address not only the problem of the time, you need to address what makes masculinity be in crisis. So what was Tate selling? Tate was selling an old basket of goods. He was just selling a vision of society of old, a world where men were very clearly on top because what was important in life was strength, and he therefore created a world in his image where strength was important, and thus he was important. That's the easy way to do it. Just selling you back an old story of past glory where you would be on top. The old view that Tate is selling is simple. And it's also complete nonsense, and we all feel that, at least at the start. And at least the people around us know that it's that way, because it makes us uncomfortable. You kind of need to buy into it. But if you're so insecure, then these tales of glory do sound kind of appealing. And it's also, of course, that you're gonna take their word for it, because they seem to have their stuff better together than you do. And now is not only the Romanian court system pushing back against Tate, the world is also pushing back against it. Teachers are pushing back, women are pushing back, like even some men are pushing back, thankfully, because we all inherently feel that this worldview is in some way nonsense. Of course, when you're delusional and when you're high on top, then the screams of those below are going to sound like cheers. It's like the plankton meme from SpongeBob. Because if you're so delusional, and also if you posit yourself and your entire business model on being a controversial figure, then people pushing back is going to give you more likes and clicks and engagement. The only way to really get rid of that, unfortunately, is by either actual deplatforming or with the legal system taking action, but that's maybe too much to ask. There should be better ways to do this. And the reason why it's always initially inherently uncomfortable, and he's talking about himself like being this controversial truth teller. The reason why there's so much resistance and why the things he's talking about are so easily disproven, like how women are apparently empirically worse parkers when that's not true, it's because Tate is selling a world that doesn't exist. He's selling a world and making it seem like that's the world we live in right now. He's not describing the world we live in right now, he's selling you a fantasy. And don't get me wrong, as a socialist I completely understand what it is like to sell a world that doesn't exist yet and trying to make your dream a reality. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're wrong in what you're saying or with the values that you hold. But what does this mean? If Tate has it the exact wrong way, that he is talking about a world that was old and not the world that we live in right now, where strength was the necessary factor for men throughout most of human history. When you think about fistfights or think about hunter and gatherer time or manual labor throughout most of human history, strength was the essential factor that determined the value of a man and thus constituted masculinity. Strength was needed to protect those you love from external threats that the world actually posed. Think about it. In the world that we live in right now, strength isn't that necessary to protect from physical threats that the world poses, because there are no physical threats that the world poses, especially not at the level of essentialness that it was back in the day. There are no bears that are randomly charging at you if you don't live in a country that is unnecessary to live in, or there are no physical threats of violence that you need to protect your territory for, like monkeys. Strength is a quality for men that has been most defining towards what it means to be a man, but it has completely lost its necessity in the society that we live in. And so you can see, by having it the other way around, what Tate does is he's creating these imaginary threats that strength would be necessary for in order to justify his existence and the idea that strength is necessary at all. You can see this quite clearly when Tate talks about that women are ungrateful, that men have always been the most important ones. They are the men that were fighting in the wars to save the women. Men were fighting to protect them from animal threats. Men were fighting to do the heavy labor in society. And who are you going to call when your sink breaks? You need a man to do so. When your car tire falls off, you need to have a man to fix it. Not only is it wrong on the fact that you can just call someone that's a professional that will do it for you, and you don't actually need a man to do it, it might as well be a woman. But it's also the case that when you talk about warfare, the evolution of warfare itself has made the factor of strength less and less important. Where in the ye olde days of hunters and gatherers you might have to fight bears or physical threats of nature, that was possible. And when you had warfare in the Roman times, that you needed to be able to be strong in order to fight others, the more coordinated warfare became with mounted archery, and you had mounted combat, and you had formations, the less the individual strength was actually necessary. If you can envision a phalanx, one person having bigger muscles than all the others isn't going to make or break a battle. If they were to flex those muscles and just run forward, then you would break the formation and spell the doom for everyone. But I would mostly want to highlight that by the invention of ranged weaponry that is actually effective and deadly, like so more than archery when you talk about guns, when you have gunfights, why would you need to have strength? You just need to be able to pull the trigger. The fights that we are simulating in the MMA fights, for example, aren't actually things that happen on a daily basis, not things you actually need to prepare for, and if they happen, you can just call the police to fix it for you. You won't even go back to them as a vigilante or something. But still, he's trying to sell the dream. Tate is trying to sell that his idea of strength is the only real way, by showing his success with women, his success with money and wealth and followers, all that. So instead of inventing threats in order to justify yourself to be important, why not look at the world right now, and what would the world require to be a good man now? You can even use the term strength still. You can think of it just in a different way. What kind of strength is needed to survive and thrive in the society that we live in right now? I just talked about how strength has changed and it has become less and less important over time. In the ye olde days, it was absolutely essential in order to survive and to be valuable to your community and to the ones you love. But as weaponry progressed and as the roles of men in society have progressed, strength has become less and less important gradually. It matters little how strong your abs are when you get a gunshot to the face. Even further, when combat ceased to be the main place of employ for men and men started having to go to factories, strength wasn't really about being strong. It was more about being durable, because now what was expected for men is to be the breadwinner, to be able to provide for your family. And slowly but surely, strength was less about being physically strong, but more about being able to provide, and taken to its extreme in the society that we live in right now, in capitalism, you get that success is defined as being rich, as having so much wealth, being able to provide. And lots of people in an economic time that doesn't allow men to be the sole breadwinner also takes away a lot of masculinity itself from men. So we kind of see both types of strength depicted in the way Andrew Tate poses his image. You see, for the one, that you have strength as actually being strong, being an MMA fighter and being durable. But you also have that he's supposed to be rich, you're supposed to have women flaunting over you. As society changed, men started to become more and more obsessed with reclaiming masculinity, and mostly in the way of strength, because that's something you can control way better than the economy. So on the one hand you have gym culture, which of course can be very healthy, but you have that you should be stronger and stronger and stronger to lift and become attractive. But on the other hand, you also have hustle culture and the grind set that your value as a man is determined on how much money you can generate and how high you can get in the hierarchy of life. So let's actually answer the question. I want to take one step back and ask, what is strength actually for? There is a need to find the real essence of strength. By now we get that in the ye olde times strength was needed for survival. We should inspect that a bit more closely. Strength was ultimately needed to protect the ones we love from harm. Strength itself then was just a means to an end. It was a way to protect the ones we love from the threats that the outside world posed. So where in the past strength was needed as a means to an end, we kind of missed that in the way that we think about being strong nowadays. Nowadays, being strong, buffed, ripped, jacked is all an end in and of itself. So we aspire to be attractive in that way, go to the gym, not for any ultimate purpose, there's no need, but we just do it because it's attractive. Even in wartime, we have great evidence from soldiers of especially the World War II that I remember, that men went to war not because they wanted to demonstrate their strength and kill others. They went to war to protect women and children and the people at home. So the answer to the question of what strength would look like nowadays is actually to answer another question. That what would be needed to protect the ones we love in the society that we live in now? Well, as you might know, in today's society, the challenges are quite different. The challenges are more abstract, they're more emotional, they're more economic and less about strength itself. So I ask you again, what does it mean to be strong now? What I think what it means to be strong nowadays is, for example, to be able to communicate well. have conflict resolution without escalation and getting yourself into real trouble, or to have peaceful relations with other people and stable relations with other people without needing to dominate them or show that we are ultimately on top. After all, it'd be quite difficult to protect the ones we love from behind bars, wouldn't it? Being strong then means being emotionally stable. It means being there for the people around you, being loving so that they can feel emotionally secure as well as physically secure. That you won't use your power, the physical edge that you have over people, in order to force your will upon them. Being strong also means that you restrain your impulses and thus make people feel safe around you. And it also means that you do not think that women belong to you like some entitled child and therefore throw temper tantrums when you ain't getting what you want to get out of them. Being strong means helping others out instead of succumbing to the dog eat dog kind of world. By all means, being strong then isn't something that is exclusively in the territory of men. But it does mean that if we talk about what healthy masculinity actually means, that it is something healthy to aspire to for men specifically. Everyone can be strong, but if we do not give people something to aspire to, nothing to grow up into and to aspire to with some stability and success in the hyper-capitalist hellhole that we've created for ourselves, is there no healthy alternative, then the only story that we will ever be able to tell is the one of the glory days of old that we keep seeing pop up again and again. And where men are by no means the only ones that can be strong, in a society created by men and for men to be on top, if the value marker for men and masculinity is toxic and we don't fix it, nothing changes. And besides, you also need men in any political project to gradually make the world more beautiful. You need men to also play a part in understanding their positions in making the world better. We can absolutely make a more equitable and fair society without having to sacrifice men on a sort of sacrificial altar. Having men's issues and women's issues are not mutually exclusive, and giving women more rights doesn't mean that it has to get on the cost of men's rights. You don't just need men to be on board in order to make the world better. You also need someone to actually help lead the way into that world. But don't get me twisted. Equality doesn't mean that everyone needs to be the same. Everyone needs to get the same, and everyone needs to be good at the same things. But that does mean that if everyone is just being themselves, that everyone can be valued and have a basic dignified existence. It doesn't mean everyone gets the same, but it means that no one gets to starve. Men can still be better at some things and women can be better at other things, but that doesn't mean that we value one more than the other fundamentally at the end of the day. It doesn't mean that when you have a play that every actor needs to be able to play every role. You're not going to ask Meryl Streep to play the villain in Aladdin, but maybe she do a fine job, but some actors can do some roles better and some actors can do other roles better, but at the end of the day they all contribute to making a good movie. We value their input equally on a fundamental level. It hasn't always been the case, especially when it comes to labor. In economic terms, we value what men do more than we value what women do. If we expect women to be mothers and care for people, then we should value caring as a concept just as much as a society as we value labor that men do as a concept. And guys, don't worry, you won't be missing out. Just between you and me, who wouldn't want women to be on top every once in a while? If you once again managed to get to the end, thank you, it's good to see you. I hope that you enjoyed it, so if you liked the video, like and subscribe. I hope you can comment down below what role model you thought was important in your life and why. So that's for the men, but also for women. What do you think are good male role models for men to be like and why? And in the meantime, I have a video up on the screen that I think you might enjoy. See you there.